Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 156 of the Standing Committee on Finance. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I'd like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. So today we're on the study of the changes to capital gains and corresponding measures announced in Budget 2024. And pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 26, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on the my apologies, members. I read something that was out of order, and so the committee is resuming its study on the pre-budget consultations in advance of the 2025 budget. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. Association québécoise de l'industrie du disque, du spectacle et de la vidéo. And we have the Director of Public Affairs with us, Simon Claus. Also joining Simon Claus is the Executive Director, Yves Paré. We also have with us from Basic Income Canada Network, Senior Scholar Sydney Frankel, and Chairperson Sheila Rieger. From the Confédération des Syndicats Nationaux, we have Union Advisor François Bélanger and Treasurer Yvon Duceppe. From the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, Acting Executive Director Patricia Tezier, and we thank you, Patricia, for joining us. I know it was really last minute, and you were able to make it work. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And from the Council of Canadian Innovators, President Benjamin Bergen is with us, as well as Director of Federal Affairs Nicholas Schiavo. And we also have from the Raven Indigenous Impact Foundation, President and Chief Executive Officer Jeffrey Sear, although we are having some challenges because of the headset is not the appropriate one, as you know, members. So what we'd ask is that any questions that do go to President Jeffrey Sear from the Raven Indigenous Impact Foundation, you can pose those questions, and they will be the responses will be sent to us in writing to our committee. And we wish that Jeffrey Sear had the right headset. I know sometimes it's difficult just in terms of the logistics in getting these headsets to our witnesses. So now on that, we are going to hear from our witnesses for up to 5 minutes for their opening remarks. I think, Ms. Rieger, were you saying you're having some trouble?
We're not getting sound.
Okay, so we will just check with the sound and interpretation and make sure that that is working. Okay, while we're changing that headset up, hopefully it works. We are going to start with opening remarks. We're going to, and that will be with the Association québécoise de l'industrie du disque et du spectacle et de la vidéo. And I understand that Yves Paré will be starting off those remarks via video conference. You may start.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to make a presentation today. ASDIC is an association of some 200 business people in the fields of music and performance. Thanks to their expertise, the artists from here can be heard and build sustainable careers. In a world that is increasingly digital, it's difficult to discover all these different local contents on platforms, streaming platforms. Every day there are more than 100,000 new downloads on these platforms. This is in a hyper-competitive environment, and the algorithms often favorize international stars that have incredible financial support and take most of the attention. And we also have a fragmentation of listening habits. It's increasingly difficult to reach out to the public, which makes our problems worse. This imbalance has led to a drop in income for Canadian producers, whereas the costs of their work continue to increase and help and make them have a sustainable career. Given that, Canada in 2018 to 19 added $10 million to the Canada Music Fund, which was for this period, made a total of $35 million. This fund supports Music Action Factor, groups that support production, broadcasting, and promotion of Canadian music products. It's important to say that this is not part of the pandemic emergency funding. And 2021, the Liberal Party committed to allocating $50 million annually for 2024-25 to the Canada Music Fund. And last year, given the extension, this was an important role to help us continue to work in the musical sector and keep our promise. We were only partly heard, however, by the government. In its recent budget, the government granted $16 million annually only for 2 years, and the industry nevertheless was very relieved. We are aware of budgetary constraints and the political context, and we are here to ask you to continue to this funding as on an annual basis. Having reliable funding is a key to success for our artists. And in addition, the difficulties that we are facing for years are also caused by the outdated Copyright Act. Two amendments we would like to see for the Act would help to help us without costing the public anything. We would like to add sound recordings in the Copyright Act. They are not remunerated for the authors, and so it would ask that this amendment of the definition of sound recording, be added as audiovisual for the holding rights, so that they could receive a remuneration for use of their music. And since its creation in 1997, the private copy regime has been an important source of income for rights holders. It is a way of supporting fees for rights holders for copying music in order to have some compensation. This system has never been revised, whereas the ways of copying music have changed. Many countries have already reviewed their system to allow things like MP3 devices and telephones to be subject to fees. So we'd ask that these technologically neutral platforms also be subject to fees. We would encourage the government to act rapidly by adding these to the Copyright Act in its fall economic statement, and having annual funding for our music and our businesses. This is a way of helping showcase our industry. Thank you very much.
And now we'll hear from the Basic Income Canada Network, and I believe it's Ms. Reger will start.
I will start. Thank you very much for the invitation to appear today. We bring a sense of urgency which we hope that you share. It's undeniable that Canadians are experiencing a polycrisis. This doesn't mean simply that multiple crises are occurring at the same time. They are interacting with each other to produce an effect that's much more serious than the sum of its parts. These crises include threats to the environment, higher poverty rates as pandemic benefits lapsed, income and asset inequality, food insecurity, decreases in the affordability of shelter and other basic needs items, precarious jobs, crime and violence, and worsening physical and mental health for many of us. A common thread in this polycrisis is the role that income security plays. It produces and makes things worse. Income is certainly not the only determinant, but it is a significant one. Inadequate coverage, poor coordination, insufficient benefits, inefficiency, and ineffectiveness in some of our income programs do not help. A basic income approach, and this is one that underlies seniors and children's benefits, has proven itself to be efficient and effective. It's a critical policy lever that government can employ more comprehensively to help solve the policy crisis and lessen its impacts. Canadians are worried, uncertain, stressed. They don't experience our income support programs as an effective safeguard against the severe risks they face, nor do they find it a support for developing their capacity to help themselves and others. A basic income guarantee does both of those things. It decreases uncertainty and risk, and it increases capacity and options. This is good for individuals and for our communities and the economy. So what is a basic income guarantee? It's very quickly a periodic cash payment with no behavioral conditions for work, education, or anything else. It's affordable because it's a better use of resources than paying for a patchwork that's generating more problems than solutions. Conditions in our programs come with costs to bureaucracies, to people who are stigmatized and constrained, to communities facing problems they can't fix, and to governments who lose the trust of citizens. A basic income guarantee is income tested. This is not the plan where billionaires get money too. It's so that people who need the most help get it when they need it. It's similar to universal health care in that regard. We really, really hope we're not going to need brain surgery, but we know that that's available to us when we need it. It does not decrease work. I cannot stress this strongly enough. Decades of research and evidence shows that it enables caring for young children, gaining education, searching for a better job, fostering entrepreneurship. It recognizes that some people actually are overworked. It provides the economic basis to start and gain from employment, including, and this happens rapidly, by improving physical and mental health.
We have 4 recommendations which are spelled out in the brief. First of all, as Sheila said, Canada has many partial basic income programs that are unconditional and universal, or at least universal for a demographic group. Given the crisis we're in, we argue that these existing vehicles should be used. Their benefits should be increased. For example, the goods and services tax credit, the guaranteed income supplement, a recommendation for a low-income supplement to the Canada Child Benefit. Secondly, the Canada Disability Benefit is a wonderful innovation, but there are 2 issues. First of all, its adequacy. It's just not large enough to fulfill the promise of moving most people with disabilities living in poverty out of poverty. And the definition in the proposed regulations is much more narrow and conditional than the definition in the Act. So we hope this changes quickly. Thirdly, innovation in basic income is occurring in provinces and territories in British Columbia, Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, in the Northwest Territories and in the Yukon, which involves significant Indigenous populations. These innovations, combined with Ontario's aborted pilot, are important for policy learning, and we think the federal government should support them financially, technically, and offer communication and coordination. Finally, we think that financial and human resources should be allocated to 2 things, developing a national framework for a basic income that will accommodate provincial and territorial interests, and developing a responsibility center for all income support programs and those conditions like health affected by income within the federal government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frankel and Ms. Reger. Now, members will move to the Confédération des syndicats nationaux for up to 5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci.
Thank you very much. Hello. First of all, thank you, committee, for inviting us to appear today. Of course, I recall that CSN represents more than 300 million members in all economic sectors, and mainly in Quebec, but also across Canada. And first thing, we would like that the government continue in implementing a budgetary and fiscal policy that is progressive, and that means that continue to link the deficit to the GDP and to meet the needs, therefore, of the Canadian and Quebec population. And there are two aspects that concern us. First of all, the monetary policy. I know that there is dependency since the government must think of the Bank of Canada, and we hope that interest rates will continue to drop because we want to avoid inflation. And I think even though the interest rates are a factor, these interest rates are especially difficult for people with low revenue. I think it's important to invest in housing, but especially housing that's outside the market, that market-based housing that will allow to reduce the long-term housing rates. And with regard, the government has also been for a number of our groups. There is the problem of a black hole. There are periods of no revenue, and I think there are a number of areas where there could be some effort to change working hours and to have a more effective system. With regard to the working, we have to for the increase the availability and the pharmacare program. I think it's very important for the population. With regard to immigration, we hear that talked about a lot lately, and we find that, and we understand that it's an important factor for the work market, but not so much for pensions. And I think we have to have greater attention on permits to control the person coming to Canada. With regard to the media play an essential role, especially in Quebec, and I think that the press must be adequately funded, and we have to broaden that to radio and television. And for Radio Canada, I think that it should have a predictable and sustained funding, because it's very important, because Radio Canada is an important factor in Quebec and Canadian culture and plays a fundamental role for culture in Canada and Quebec. And I think for the environment, we talk about efforts to reduce greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, I think that this is difficult for public transit that does not have ongoing budgets. And I think over the long term, we have to ensure that we adequately fund our public transit authorities. This should be from both the federal and the provincial governments. And I think it's the federal government as well that should play a major role. And I think there is a specific measure for training. There was an interruption with regard to the development of the work market, and I think that we would restore funding for training so that our workers will have adequate training for the working market. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. And again, Ms. Tazier, thank you for coming with such short notice.
Merci. Thank you. Very pleased to be here. As you introduced me, I'm Patricia Tazier. I'm the Acting Executive Director for the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, or as we call it, CHF Canada for short. CHF Canada is the national voice of housing cooperatives. Some of you may know there are more than 2,200 housing cooperatives located in every province and territory across Canada, home to 250,000 Canadians. Cooperative housing is a well-documented success story. Co-op housing is affordable because it is operated at cost, meaning housing charges. We call them housing charges, not rent. Housing charges are increased only to cover costs of operating and maintaining the buildings. Co-op housing is secure because there's no outside landlord who might hike up the rents or sell the building or renovate. Co-op housing is inclusive, as almost all operate on a mixed income model. And it brings people of all backgrounds together to make decisions about their housing together and support each other. In a world of growing housing insecurity and social isolation, co-op housing offers proven solutions to these financial and social struggles. But we need more. And we need to protect what we have. So, a budget asks, this upcoming budget is an opportunity to solidify and further scale the existing federal commitment to build more co-op housing. I have 4 recommendations. First and foremost, we need to build significantly more homes, co-op homes. Canada must at minimum double the proportion of non-market community housing, meaning co-ops and nonprofit housing. The recently launched Cooperative Housing Development Program, and it's wonderful, thank you, is playing a critical role in enabling the development of the next generation of co-op housing. However, the demand is exceeding availability. And this program will help, this existing program and funding will help, but the program should grow in its ambitions with a larger funding envelope. And I can tell you, the sector is ready. Second, ask, we also need to protect existing affordable rental homes and the tenants who live there. And we can do this through an accelerated and sector-led Canada Rental Protection Fund. We are losing affordable housing more than we are building housing, affordable housing, at a rate of 15 to 1. If you'll permit me to repeat that, we are losing more affordable housing than we are building at a rate of 15 to 1. This is because a lot of relatively affordable housing in Canada is actually in the private rental market, where the affordability is not guaranteed, like it is with a co-op housing. Rather, renters are one hike away, a rent hike away or rent eviction away from losing affordability, which is then lost forever. And it is not lost on me that the previous witnesses have talked to things that are very much impactful or relate to this. The recently announced Canada Rental Protection Fund is an important first step to enable cooperative and nonprofit housing to purchase rental properties that are relatively affordable and are for sale. Tenants, both current and future, would be protected this way because that housing could be converted to a co-op or nonprofit, therefore guaranteeing its affordability long-term. Cooperative housing model does that. It does guarantee affordability long-term. Now we need to see a rapid implementation of a sector-led fund. My third, we must also advance Indigenous housing rights by fully implementing the urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. Providing culturally appropriate and affordable housing is an important way for Canada to advance reconciliation. An urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy is essential. Implementation of the committed $4.3 billion in federal funding for this strategy led by Indigenous housing provider is urgently needed. And the funding should lead to continued deeper investments aligned with the need. My final and fourth recommendation is that we invest in long-term rental assistance for low-income households. Through the Federal Community Housing Initiative that exists now, low-income households living in co-ops and nonprofits receive modest rental assistance. So their housing charge for co-ops, does not cost more than 30% of their income. Typically, about a third of co-op members receive rental assistance, but this expires in 2028. This is what enables co-ops to be diverse, mixed income communities. The federal government should commit to extending this program past 2028. This would support 40,000 households with low income who live in co-ops and nonprofits across the country. Rental assistance is a cost-effective program to government because housing charges in co-ops are far less than market rents. And we have a research paper that demonstrated this. And because homelessness is much more expensive. To conclude, a housing system that works for all people in Canada must include more co-op housing, and co-ops are ready to grow and help remedy Canada's housing supply and affordability crisis. Thank you for your time. I look forward to any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Tezzi. I'm sure there'll be many questions. Now we'll hear from the Council of Canadian Innovators. I believe we're starting with its president, Benjamin Bergen.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the House Standing Committee on Finance. Thank you for the opportunity to present today on behalf of Canadian job and wealth creators from across the country. My name is Benjamin Bergen. I'm President of the Council of Canadian Innovators, or CCI. I'm pleased to be joined today by my colleague Nick Chavo, Director of Federal Affairs. CCI represents over 150 of Canada's fastest growing technology-intensive companies. All of our members are proudly headquartered in Canada, employing thousands of workers across the country. These companies are leaders in sectors critical to our economic future, like AI, cybersecurity, fintech, health technologies, clean tech, and more. They are innovating right here at home while commercializing their solutions globally, selling to governments and consumers across Europe, Asia, and of course, the United States. As we approach Budget 2025, it's important to recognize that Canada is at a crossroads. We are experiencing what many are calling the Great Canadian Slump, with rising living costs, stagnant productivity, and a declining GDP per capita. This reality is making it harder for Canadians to maintain their standard of living. The facts are striking. Real median wages have barely grown since the 1970s, and Canada's productivity has dropped to less than 1% since the year 2000. Forecasts now suggest Canada could be the worst performing economy in the OECD in the near future. These challenges are compounded by structural issues like climate change, global conflicts, and pressure on our healthcare system. But I'm not here to complain, and our members are not passive bystanders to these challenges. CCI's members have been actively working on policy solutions, and we believe with the right strategic actions, Canada can turn the tide. One of the most important areas for reform is Canada's approach to working with homegrown companies and ensuring Canada remains home to the very organizations that will fuel the country's long-term prosperity. At the heart of our recommendations is that we need a modern industrial strategy, one that places innovation, productivity, and the intangible assets at the core of our economic framework. This must include reforming key programs like the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credit, or SR&ED. Currently, the program is outdated, and its complexity hinders domestic companies from being able to fully benefit from it. In fact, a significant portion of SR&ED funding goes to foreign firms. We believe this must change to better support Canada's innovators. Our budget submission recommends cost-neutral ways to improve this critical program, and I'd be happy to explore this issue further during our Q&A. Additionally, reforming government procurement is essential. Government procurement spending represents a significant portion of our GDP, yet our procurement systems are often lacking risk-averse and are rigid and lacking the flexibility to adapt new innovative solutions. This not only stifles Canadian companies, but it also prevents governments from accessing cutting-edge technologies that could improve the public service. The changes won't happen overnight, but tackling these procurement barriers is vital for unlocking Canada's innovation potential. I'm also happy to expand on this topic if it's of interest to the committee and speak to our recent reports, Building Winners and Buying Ideas. We also need to avoid policies and inadequately punish innovators and entrepreneurs. The recent changes to the capital gain tax, for example, are counterproductive at a time when we need to be fostering growth and investment. These policies create an added burden on entrepreneurs, making it harder for Canadian companies to scale and compete globally. When Canada's productivity is in crisis, we cannot afford to hold back our most innovative companies and their leaders. In closing, I want to address something I heard from Minister Champagne today at the Indu Committee, which I saw a reporter from The Logic tweet out. The minister suggested the challenges facing Canada's economy are due to a lack of ambition from our innovators and business leaders. If only innovators would seize the moment, we'd be better off, the minister stated. Frankly, this view is troubling, and it ignores the realities that entrepreneurs growing businesses in Canada are living through. For nearly a decade, we've been telling the government that Canadians are innovative, ambitious, and relentless in their businesses as anywhere else in the world. The real issue is that our government isn't providing the modern policy frameworks needed for them to succeed. They're still using old playbooks. Meanwhile, superpowers like the US, Europe, and Asia are using new strategies to reflect the digital economy their companies are operating in. I get it. It's easier for government to blame innovators instead of tackling the responsibility for the role they should be playing to create the marketplace frameworks for innovative Canadian companies to succeed. But it's like a hockey coach blaming the players for not skating fast enough when there's no ice on the rink. The problem isn't Canadian ambition. It's our policies, strategies, and institutions that aren't harnessing and supporting innovators. That's why Budget 2025 represents a crucial opportunity to enact bold reforms that will foster innovation, increase productivity, and drive long-term economic growth. I look forward to answering any questions and further discussing how we can build an economy that Canadians deserve, one that is prosperous, innovative, globally competitive for years to come. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bergen. And just to members again, we do have Raven Indigenous Impact Foundation. Its president and chief executive officer, Jeffrey Sear, here. He will be able to hear you. He will be able to note any questions that you may have, and they'll have to come to us in writing because the headset is not to specifications for our committee. So on that, we are going to go to members' questions. In this first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. We are starting with MP Gray, and welcome MP Gray to our Finance Committee.
Great. Thank you very much. It's good to be here, and thank you to all of the witnesses for today. My first questions are for the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. I sit normally on the Housing Committee, and we just completed a housing study where we heard from a variety of witnesses who were talking about the Liberal government policies administered by the government's housing agency, where there was a lot of extra red tape and costs, and specifically having to do with, for example, building requirements that were above meeting building codes, additional type of costs like quantity surveyors or energy consultants, which might be difficult, especially in rural areas. These all add a lot of costs, and we had witnesses say that this could add tens of thousands to any project, and a lot of these are also in addition to normal building and even getting occupancy permits. So my question for you is this anything that you've seen and experienced, how some of those policies might be adding to costs when you're actually trying to through those that you represent actually build affordable housing, and so that's my question to you. Thanks.
Sure. I assume I just go ahead.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. In terms of red tape, I would come back with maybe more information. I know that with costs on accessibility requirements, so some programs with funding have accessibility requirements. and energy efficiency requirements, which can add, but can also save in the long term. I think with accessibility, what we have asked in the past is that the accessibility requirements not be based on a single project, but can look more portfolio wide, because at times there's no particular local need for accessibility. So there might be units built, but not necessarily used. Other than that, the administration and reporting back from a funding program can sometimes add costs, not necessarily to your question, I believe, which is the administrative or red tape for actually constructing or building new housing. So I would separate those because I think you might get comments on the administration as well on reporting.
Thank you. Great, thank you very much. My next questions are for the Council of Canadian Innovators. You had commissioned a survey of entrepreneurs in July, which showed 90% of respondents believed the Liberals' capital gains tax hike would have a negative effect on the innovation economy. And yet Liberal Budget 2024 stated, quote, increasing the capital gains inclusion rate is not expected to hurt Canadian business competitiveness, unquote. Do you believe the Liberal government's assessment on that to be accurate?
No, I do not. I do not believe so. I think it's unequivocally false.
Thank you. Also, in this survey that you did, it listed 67% of tech entrepreneurs that responded from your survey has said that access to capital is their top challenge in business. Do you think these Liberal capital gains tax increases will hurt the ability of Canadian workers and businesses in the tech sector to stay in Canada?
So not a question of if, but it already is impacting it. And so a lot of the information that we've been receiving, initially when it was announced was uncertainty, obviously because the measures themselves hadn't been fully baked, and then a continued delay of it. And so what we have heard, not only from our member companies, but broader folks in the ecosystem, is that it's impacting their ability to go and raise capital, right? Because it's less attractive here in Canada, where you can do it south of the border. It's making it more difficult to keep highly skilled workers here because their potential stock options are at a higher rate. And then ultimately the returns are lower. And so it's sort of a perfect combo where you're seeing it impact founders, employees, and investors.
Thank you. You had mentioned in your opening statement the issue of government procurement, and so I wanted to ask you on that. There was a report that was written in April of 2024 by your organization that had to do with historic innovation underperformance, and we've seen under this Liberal government IT procurement policies and actually management that has led to ArriveCan style results favoring well-connected friends and wasting taxpayer dollars, not following government processes. And so with that, have you seen how this might damage our innovation economy and reputation of Canada's tech sector with the way that that the government is currently managing their procurement system?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple pieces in that, and great question. I think ArriveCan is actually a symptom of a process that's broken, right? If we actually had a transparent, clear mechanism for domestic firms to be able to procure, we wouldn't have seen something like ArriveCan happen. And it was during sort of the darkest days of COVID, and those exceptions on those pieces you can consider. But if we had a straightforward process, we would see firms actually be able to access and properly go through it. So the complexity of it is definitely part of the issue in terms of why we've arrived at ArriveCan. So I don't want anyone in this committee thinking that procuring domestic leads to ArriveCan. That is not the conclusion that should be reached. So that's step one. Step two is because the procurement system is so complex and challenging, you often don't even get domestic firms even applying because they know that the way that the RFPs are written, they know that the way that certain structures are set up, there's no way for them to actually win contracts. And so a lot of the member companies that we work with could sell to the Canadian government, but A, it's so delayed and time consuming that they actually go and try and sell to other governments. And the reality often is that you go and become successful elsewhere before our own governments will actually purchase your product. So that's sort of the headwinds that we're facing.
Thank you. And thank you, MP Gray. Now we'll go to MP Baker, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and merci à tous les témoins d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. Normally, I would ask questions of several witnesses, but today I have someone from my
Madame Régueux, merci d'être ici. Je suis ravie de voir une de mes commettantes en personne. Ça ne se produit pas tous les jours. J'ai écouté votre déclaration et j'aimerais faire quelques suivis. Vous avez d'abord parlé de certains des avantages d'un revenu de base garantie. J'aimerais aller plus en détail. Vous avez parlé de la diminution du risque. Pouvez-vous nous en parler plus avant?
Other witnesses have kind of highlighted this too. It is risky in Canada, and there is very little protection against those kinds of new risks that people are facing. We were just commenting that one of our former board members he's achieved great high-tech success in a company, and he says it's because he got a basic income from his wife, who was earning when he had nothing, and so could put it into a business. So the risks are, the kinds of things that humans face all the time. We can just be unlucky in our genetics. We can face health problems, curable by our healthcare system, but take some time to recover that people don't have the funding for. And then we've got all of these risks that are increasing with technology and artificial intelligence, with a precarious work environment, with just living longer. I have a brother-in-law who came out of high school with very little education, with the expectation he could walk down the street and get a good job, and he would work his way up and he'd be set for life. Like, that doesn't happen anymore. People do need to transition throughout their lives. And so there needs to be some underpinning, some economic stability to be able to make those transitions and to plan to do better. Otherwise, people are trapped, and that doesn't help any of us.
Oh, that makes sense. One of the things you talked about was that there's a patchwork of programs out there. What would you recommend be done about that? First of all, what is the patchwork? Could you sort of explain what you mean, which programs, or could you cite some examples so that we all understand what you mean by that? But then what would you recommend be done about that group of programs? Absolutely.
Yeah. So the patchwork has to do with a series of categorical programs for people with disabilities, programs for families with children, programs for seniors, and the working age population having only very meager programs, largely left out. A basic income is what we propose to do about it. So this is, at its full implementation, a universal benefit which has no conditions, which in a sense is an entitlement, a right of citizenship, and it eliminates the kind of problems we saw in COVID, where existing programs were inadequate. New programs were put into place. They needed to be put into place. But there were many inequalities in those new programs. So, for example, if we look at the CERB and the CRB, it didn't apply to people who may have had additional costs because of COVID, but hadn't earned at least $5,000 in the last year. So there were people falling through the cracks. So a basic income, by definition, eliminates most of those cracks by having a single program structure.
And just for my clarity as to what you're recommending, is that, am I hearing you say that a basic income, if it's the appropriate amount with the appropriate criteria and structure, I realize there's a lot of detail here to be thought through, or understood, but is the idea that it would then replace those programs? Is that what we're talking about?
It would replace,
or supplemental to?
It would replace many programs. It would replace those programs meant to meet basic needs. but wouldn't replace those programs meant to meet special needs, like the variable costs of medication, which some households don't experience at all and some experience at very large amounts, like the additional costs related to having a disability. So we take the term basic income seriously. It's meant to meet basic needs and can be partially funded by eliminating other programs meant to meet basic needs.
Appreciate that. I have about 30 seconds left. Am I right? So a quick question, to the extent you can answer quickly, I appreciate it, is can you give us a sense of like what amount of money are we talking about, either to the individual, but also more broadly, if you know, how much would be required for the government to make this possible?
Right. Thank you for that question. So we have done modeling. The Parliamentary Budget Office has done modeling based on our parameters. Our amount was replicated by CERB. Actually, we published this right before COVID hit. So that's what a mature basic income looks like, so that it really does provide a sufficient amount that people can meet their basic needs. Now, not everybody's going to get that amount. Some will get smaller. Sorry, let me just quickly. But the important thing now is to start. Like, we know that full program, that national framework that's needed, because we're talking about provincial programs too. And those are the ones, the social assistance programs, that really don't work. They're punishing people, they're making people sick. So we need a mature system, we need a national program. That's not going to happen overnight. What we want in this budget is a start with the programs that already exist that can deliver that unconditional income to whatever extent is possible within the budget, because people are really hurting. And any amount at this point is going to, as for our previous, is going to help keep people housed, keep people from resorting to crime to meet their needs. Yeah. Taking some risks.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll have more opportunity. Just we're well over time. And now we're going to MP Samari, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here, for your presentations and for your answers to our questions. It's very useful for us and for our report that we have to make to the government. And as Yvon said, I will not have time to ask questions to all the witnesses. But know that I will take notes and send in questions. First of all, I would like to congratulate you, because earlier we had a delegation from Sweden, including the governor of the Central Bank of Sweden. And really the presentation and with a number of segments in Swedish, it was very interesting and useful. And thank you for the questions and the participation by various members of the committee, also for the analysts. Thank you for the preparatory document that was provided, and thank you as well to the interpreter team that was with us as well. So thank you very much. And that being said, I'm going to start with Adisk. Thank you for being here and explain, convince us how to convince the Minister of Finance to, with regard to the increasing the Canada Music Fund. Well, there is about $25 million, which is already in place, and for the difference, and 25 and 42 million. These are amounts that are the current funding only goes to 2026, and we have until then to convince the ministry to renew these supports for businesses that do not receive this funding in the future. That will create a great deal of uncertainty, and this would be very, very, very regrettable. So you've said that it's important to have these programs made permanent, and they only have funding now for 2 years, as announced by the government. And how do you see that happening? What should the government do to ensure that there is constant funding and eliminate uncertainty? As I said, more than half of the financing will be disappearing, so we have to constantly ask for the amounts to be renewed, and the additional sums must take into account the needs of the industry, and the current amounts we would like them to be made permanent over the long term. Thank you. And should the government see these sums as an expense or as an investment in our society and our economy? It is an investment. It's an investment in culture, in Canadian identity, and these music industries are industries and groups that take risks with artists. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes not, and this allows them also to go into and continue funding arts in Canada. Thank you. With regard to copyrights, explain to us the definition of sound recordings. What's the problem there? I'll ask my colleague to explain the situation.
Your mic. No. Some technical challenges. Press the space bar, please. If you could press the space bar, if you can hear me. No, it's not working.
Bon, mais je vais y aller dans ce cas.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead.
Clause.
Donc, la définition.
My definition of sound recording or soundtrack, as defined in the law, should exclude when a musical product is added to audiovisual presentation. For example, something, a soundtrack used for a film or a television program. There must be fees to the rights holders. That does not currently apply under the law, and the creators, artists, are not remunerated when their music is used. So this is an exclusion for that type of a situation. So thank you. That's very clear. And Mr. Clark, are you there? Yes, sorry. I unplugged and plugged in again, and I think it's now working. I'm sorry. The fees for using the work of the artists in film and television, there should be fair remuneration and to respect the copyrights of these artists, but there should be fair compensation for use of their music in soundtracks and in television. And are there other countries facing the same challenges, or is it the situation better in the other countries in comparison to Canada? But we have to know that the Copyright Act is an economic type bill which provides for remuneration for use of copyrights, and this is something that is essential for the musical industry. And a few years ago, with changes in technology and other decisions, we wish to correct the situation in order to ensure that the use of change the definition of a soundtrack or sound recording. And this has been done in a number of countries like the European Union and elsewhere. And this is to take into account the new reality for the music industry. And I think we should align ourselves with our partners. So these are things that are found in other countries. Thank you very much. And so for with regard to private copies, in order for it to be technologically neutral? Has there been the same situation in other countries, and have they acted? And so you're asking that the law be amended in that regard as well? Yes. Europe, even telephones, smartphones, and that has not led to any increase in the cost of these new devices, because we do not see countries coming here to buy their smartphones. Thank you.
Monsieur Claus, back on. And now to MP Davies, please.
Thank you. I'd like to direct my questions initially to you, Ms. Tessier. In the 1970s, 80s, right up until the early 1990s, my research indicates the federal government, I think via Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, pioneered a very, very successful national co-op program. Can you tell us approximately how many of those 2,200 co-ops that exist in Canada today were built through that program and federal assistance in the 70s and 80s?
Yes, indeed. That was the beginning of the growth, and it's too bad it stalled. I don't have exact numbers, but definitely, I would say it's near the third of what we have. But we will follow up with the exact numbers.
Okay.
Yes, definitely federal government helped launch the growth of the sector.
I can tell you in my riding of Vancouver Kingsway, I still see, I think somewhere between 12 and 15 of those co-ops are still successfully being run today and providing homes, stable homes for hundreds and hundreds of families in our riding. Now, in 1992, the Brian Mulroney Conservative government cut that federal co-op housing program in its final budget before resigning. Can you outline what the impact of that decision by the federal government to exit the federal co-op support program had on the development of new co-op housing units across the country in subsequent years?
Yes, definitely one big impact that we've been trying to address is the capacity to build. So we used to have resource groups, and in fact in Quebec, those resource groups were maintained because they still had funding programs. So the resource groups that helped with building, so development, building the knowledge, all that, the technical expertise, really dissipated. The key too is that it's for affordability. I mean, we can build, but not necessarily affordably, right? So with that capital and a program from federal government, it allows that leg up, right? And to be affordable, right? It's all about the numbers.
Of course. Now, you mentioned the recently launched cooperative housing development program, and I think you quite rightfully point out that it can play a critical role in helping to develop the next generation of cooperative housing. How many units is it expected to produce in its current form?
Yeah, really good question. Again, that was alluded to, I think, by almost all of the witnesses here. The cost of construction has gone up so dramatically, which is why we are also in our speaking about the Canada Rental Protection Fund. However, the program, assuming average across the country, so some in cities are more expensive than others, and not necessarily requiring a partner, but knowing that some partners will come in, such as municipalities or others, probably between 3,000 and 3,200 or 300 units, as we call it.
Nationally?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Now, I was talking earlier today with the Financial Wellness Lab, who operate out of Western University, and they've done extensive research, and they told me today that housing and rent costs are the number one economic concern of Canadians today. They also said that Canada loses $54 billion in lost productivity every year due to the impact of financial stress. So putting those two things together, the major source of financial stress is housing costs. We lose $54 billion in productivity. I noticed that in your pre-budget submission, Ms. Tessier, you said that the problem of lagging productivity requires policy intervention and growth-minded policy that will benefit parts of society. And you identified that building not-for-profit housing, including co-ops, will generate more wealth for everyone and increase productivity. Can you expand on that for us? The connection between housing and productivity.
Yes, and we can go to dinner after, and I can continue. But generally speaking, we're also seeing a link to economic development. So there's many towns, cities that don't have affordable housing, and therefore the businesses can't actually be open. So this is recurring. We are hearing this a lot. I've also heard younger generation that may not have kids or may wait longer for kids, and all of these do impact. The stress, obviously, is when we're seeing, sadly, I think, more leaves taken. So all of these do impact the ability to maintain your employment, to stay healthy and be a productive contributor to society. So, just as very high level, I would address your question that way, and happy to speak about it more.
Mr. Chair, how am I doing for time?
You have about 30 seconds, MP Davies.
Just a quick question then, Ms. Tessier. How many affordable housing units do you estimate can be preserved with the $1.5 billion allocated to the Canada Rental Protection Fund that you mentioned?
Yeah, thank you. So given construction costs are way higher, and I gave you about an approximate of what the 1.5 will do for new growth, on a really ballpark, I would say we could be increasing that probably by 20% or so. So probably more in the area of 4,000 to possibly 5,000, depending on where we buy. There is definitely, I myself have looked private rental apartment buildings for sale in places like Winnipeg that are much less and more affordable. So it, again, generally speaking, depends where we target and what's available.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Davies. And now, members, witnesses, we're moving into our second round of questions. We're starting with MP Chambers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to have a number of great witnesses here today. Mr. Sear, I apologize we won't be able to hear from you, but rest assured that we did receive your submission. And we may look for another opportunity to invite you back, but we'll talk about that offline. But appreciate the work that you've done to advance procurement opportunities and paying for outcomes. For the Canadian Council of Innovators, Mr. Bergen, you referenced a couple things I'd like to expand a little more. What are you mentioned some challenges with SHRED. Can you elaborate briefly?
Yeah, for sure. So for those not familiar, SHRED's a $4 billion a year expenditure for the government. It's actually our largest expenditure in terms of innovation. About 18,000 companies receive it. But when you sort of dig into it, sort of a handful of companies receive, close to 25% of every SHRED dollar. And it turns out that a good chunk of those are actually foreign multinationals. So in a space like the innovation economy, where unemployment is effectively zero, we're subsidizing the R&D of foreign multinationals while making it more challenging for our own domestic firms to be able to hire and create opportunity for their firms. Now, this has consequences where you're no longer creating IP-rich companies, which is where wealth and prosperity has really moved to, and you're supporting firms that ultimately are taking the wealth out of the country. And to sort of indicate how sort of systemic this is, up until 2021, Huawei was still receiving a considerable amount of money from this program, indicating that we're funding not only the R&D of foreign firms, but also foreign firms that we've actually deemed to be a national security risk, and which we view to be confrontational to us as a nation.
Sorry, I just have to confirm. Are you suggesting that Huawei was still receiving rebates under the SHRED program?
Correct.
Wow. Isn't it also true that about 30% of the program is spent on a cottage industry of consultants that help people with the paperwork to fill out these applications?
Yeah, so I think there's like two pieces here, right? One is, where's the money going? Is it actually leading to outcomes that are leading to wealth and prosperity? You know, listening around the room, it really sounds like we have a revenue challenge in this country, right? We can't pay for housing, we can't pay for arts and culture, right? And so by creating opportunities where we're able to drive and support domestic firms, in programs like Shred and making sure that those dollars are being allocated to the right outcomes, that's kind of one step. So definitely looking at it from that framework. The other is also the cost, right? Shred hasn't really been updated, in more than 40 years. And so we have a program that basically companies have to contort themselves in order to be able to access the funding. And so it requires, a sort of a gambit of different types of consultants and agents. And so an entire Shred cottage industry, has built up in many practices. Now, look, programs do need overhead and do need to cost things, but when it's close to 25 to 30% going towards consultancies rather than driving outcomes, we've got a real challenge here, a real issue.
And if I can just add on that quickly, this is not something new. Here at CCI, we've been calling for reform to this program for almost a decade. We secured a win in Budget 2023 to, have some kind of consultation. That consultation process has now happened twice. In both cases, we've participated. But, speaking on behalf of our members in the industry, I would say if we don't see concrete reforms to update the program for the 21st century in the fall economic statement, I think many of us would consider that a failure. So we do hope for the best.
Thank you very much. I think I have about a minute left. On capital gains tax, just so I'm clear, the feedback from your members is it will create incentives for them to look south of the border. Is that your testimony?
Yes, yeah, unequivocally.
And I was also at Indu committee this morning. In my free time, I like to travel around and watch other committees. I heard the same quote. How does it make you feel when you hear a minister say what he did? And then also when you look at like the Shred you just mentioned, or the amount of money that we subsidize to foreign multinationals in electric vehicle battery sector, but then they're putting taxes higher on Canadian companies that are based here trying to grow them.
Yeah, so I'll remove feelings on this one, and I think we just need to sort of look at sort of the reality. And to quote William Blake, execution is the chariot of genius. And what we've seen from this government over the last 10 years is an inability to execute. Looking at various programs, whether it be things like superclusters, which were downgraded to clusters, whether it looks to the creation of the Canadian Innovation Corporation, the economic tables. I mean, this is really a government that has truly struggled to understand where the 21st century economy is going. And I think sort of the last remarks of a minister to blame innovators for their inability to deliver is an indication that the government has lost the plot, and truly indicates real challenges going forward in terms of how are we actually going to get ourselves out of these challenges economically so that we can pay for housing, so that we can pay for transit, so we can pay for healthcare, so we can pay for arts and culture. And so, I would turn it back really on the minister to say, show us what you've accomplished, show us what you've done. And, then we can talk about, who's got ambition and who's able to actually deliver.
Thank you very much.
And now we're off to MP Zerowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Sheila and to Sydney for being here for Basic Income. My colleague asked excellent questions. I think I'm very supportive. And so I'm going to just say thank you for coming. Your recommendations are very clear. I also want to say huge thanks to Patricia Tessier. You did a great presentation. I'm a huge believer in what you have said. We have to give far more money to our nonprofits and co-ops. My colleague Joanne's going to ask a few more questions of you, but I also want to say that we also have to do far more to protect existing affordable housing stock, and we are seized with this right now, and it's something I'm very much working on. But my questions I want to leave whatever time I've left to the Council of Canadian Innovators. Very biting testimony today. And I think you both know that I'm a very big supporter of the vast majority of recommendations that you've put forward. And I I would like to say that I didn't hear my colleague's testimony this morning, but I know that we very much believe in innovators in our country, and we have great confidence in them. We think we have the smartest, brightest innovators, and I do agree with you. There's even more we can do to help support them. The first thing I wouldn't mind asking about is your procurement. Part of the reason our procurement and really I almost want to blow the whole sort of system up is because we also have very much, not only do we have excellent innovators, but I also think we have a small business economy. And so I would like both our innovators and our small business economy to be able to tap into our procurement. The thing is, it seems like such a big beast. And if I had to ask you, how do we get started in terms of the first step or two, what would be your recommendation?
Thank you for your question. And, look, if, our comments are viewed as, spicy or fiery, I think it just is an indication of where we are as a country, right? If our economy had grown over the last decade to similar places like Denmark or the United States or Australia, there'd be an additional $500 billion in our economy each year, more than enough to pay for probably the housing requests that we've seen put forward at this committee, or the arts and culture, or, potentially a basic income. So getting innovation right, getting the 21st century economy right is critical. We have a revenue problem in this country, and the people that we work with are revenue generators. So figuring out ways to support them is critical. And so, I know the minister does support innovators in terms of his language, but when he goes to committee, it is truly troubling that that's his framing. Now, on the procurement piece, I will kick it over to Nicholas to tackle that, because there is real opportunity here for the government to do something transformative. It's going to take time, but there's an opportunity.
Thanks, Benjamin. Yeah, so thank you for that question, MP Jurwitz. And I think if I could offer the committee maybe one top-line concrete recommendation to start to move the logjam, it would be to create a dedicated fund for technology procurement that departments could use when they need quick, innovative solutions. And so the idea behind this fund would be to reduce risk aversion, support ongoing product development with firms, with suppliers, and focus on key areas that are strategic both for Canadians and for the government. So think energy, healthcare, clean tech, cybersecurity. Ideally, this fund, which can be modeled after international examples like the SBIR, would have a simple, fast application process. It would be focused on collaboration. It would build capacity within the public service. And it would also offer financial incentives for departments to take risks. But if I can take a step back, I would say I think there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what procurement is or should be in the federal government, and this is shared across governments of all stripes going back decades. Procurement is not a silo just to get things. It is 15% of our GDP. And so every single year, the federal government, governments across the country are spending billions of taxpayer dollars on everything from pencils to software to fighter jets, but we are not doing it in a way that is strategic. Other advanced economies understand that they can use procurement not only to deliver services for their citizens, but also to grow their economy and to play to those domestic firms where there are strengths. So I do think it is a bit of a cultural shift in terms of procurement in this country. And simply put, procurement done well is prosperity for Canadians. So I do hope we can see some of that change.
Thank you. And then just very quickly, because I know that I've run out of time, but I just want to say to you, I agree with, I read through your recommendations. The shift of value to intangibles, I do think that I would say a lot of Canadians do not understand that that is underway and has been underway for a while. You have made recommendations around making sure that we have clear performance indicators and explicit measurements around prosperity and growth for our foreign direct investment. I wonder, just as a follow-up to our committee, if you could provide maybe a bit of some suggestions of what those could be, that would be really helpful. And I know I've run out of time, Mr. Chair, but I want to thank very much all the witnesses today for their excellent presentations. Thank you.
Yeah, we can definitely work to that.
Thank you.
And if you can allow those two to come to committee, that would be great. And I've got MP Sainte-Marie is next up.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. A question for Mr. Giuseppe with regard to the reform of employment insurance. There have been consultations and in the mandate letter, and this has been delayed. Can you recall the importance of this type of reform, and why is it urgent to have this reform? Yes. Why is it urgent? Because when when one depends on employment insurance, this is not a very high income to start with, and in some cases, in particular, we find seasonal workers, for example, the people who work in forestry or elsewhere, or tree planting, for example, and it's not always possible to do that in all the seasons in Canada. So often we find ourselves, according to the length of the season, we don't have enough time of a long enough work period to meet to justify the needs and enough pay through employment insurance. This is what we call the black hole. And I think it's not just that. We talk about that, but there are also things like often we say, well, you have to have 720 hours, but there you don't take into account the people that work part-time, and part-time workers. It's very nice to work 35, 40 hours a week, but when you find yourself with people who only work a few days a week, they, I think, there has to be some adjustment and take into account the weeks of work so that we have people who can nevertheless qualify for employment insurance. Another factor is often there are other types of benefit that they receive, but they are not taken into account, and that creates some economic insecurity, and as much as possible we have to avoid exclusions and disqualifications. I think there are too many of them, and I think in Gaspé and the Lower St. Lawrence and elsewhere, unfortunately, the inhabitants are asking for real action, and that the government, the federal government, keep its promises because they really need this type of income. Thank you very much.
MP Davies, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Tessier, I think the housing crisis affects every community and every demographic, from coast to coast to coast. But I think we can all acknowledge that there's an acute need among our Indigenous Métis and Inuit communities. I note in your pre-budget submission, you said that Budget 2024 committed $4.3 billion over 7 years to co-develop an urban, rural, and northern housing strategy. Implementation of this funding is urgently needed, led by the Indigenous housing sector. Could you elaborate on what you see as the key components of that strategy and how you believe that funding might best be allocated?
Yes, thank you for the question. Definitely a key component, as you iterated, was led by Indigenous housing providers. The for Indigenous, by Indigenous is a key component to the success, as well as recognizing and ensuring funding allows for appropriate housing. The needs are different, the cultures are different. So even in a recent conversation about multi-generational, so that is very common in certain Indigenous cultures to have multi-generational living nearby or living within, as well as having community space, gathering space, which is aligned, just examples of appropriate to the culture at hand. So I think those are two key things, taking the time to engage and recognizing that the voices need to be heard, but very, very much the for Indigenous, by Indigenous will be the biggest key to success in that.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
You've got approximately a minute, MP Davies.
Thank you. Ms. Tessier, I'm interested in the dual needs of capital funding and partnerships to help build the co-ops that so many people need in Canada, and then the operational funding that is often required to do that. Can you elaborate and maybe give us your thoughts on how the federal government can play a role in either or both of those areas?
Yes, thank you again. So the capital funding is the initial contribution if we're developing new, and that initial contribution, like any of us who have a house, right? It lowers ultimately the operating cost because it lowers your mortgage and therefore can be more affordable. So that's capital and why that is required for affordable housing. The operational funding really is more geared towards how affordable then. So that's where the ask is for the rental subsidy for low income, just to ensure that it can be no more than 30% of their income. Some new programs and new language is really now talking about the average market income and not being over a certain percentage of the average market income, but that's problematic where the average market income just keeps increasing. So then if it's not tied to income and there's no rental subsidy, again, that'll lead to some homelessness and as we talked about, reducing the productivity and impacting availability of staff for businesses. So the operational is really probably less about operating costs of a building, but more about how to ensure we keep the homes affordable. So those that are lower income or deep need have the income to contribute to the cost of running or operating the housing. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you, MP Davies. And now to MP Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Council of Innovators, do we need investment in Canada in machinery, equipment, IT, technology, physical infrastructure? What are some of the things that we need investment in to reverse this productivity gap?
Yeah, so in Canada's tech sector, we really struggle to have the capital required in order to help companies scale and grow. And so there's a few areas where this sort of plays out. One is in sort of the VC space. There's very few VC firms that have sort of capital allocation to be able to help firms scale and grow. And so often firms have to go outside of Canada in order to access funding. So we have some capital challenges in the VC space that are an issue. In terms, though, of where government really should be focusing its energy is looking at what are the outcomes that are going to drive firms for being successful. And our mantra really at the council is the government shouldn't be picking winners; they should be supporting winners. And so when you look at different government programs and different funding opportunities, how are those funds being marshaled and allocated towards those firms that are showing green spurts and showing real opportunity? Often in Canada, we support research, but we forget about the development side of things. And it's the development side of things that fundamentally will pay for many of the things that folks in this room, are talking about. So, looking at ways of alleviating that and creating opportunity is critical. And we point to, SHRED really just being one of many programs where the government could be, allocating those dollars more effectively.
So will increasing the inclusion rate on capital gains help draw investment into your sector?
So in terms of the analysis that's been done, not just by our organization, but by others, is that when you make it more expensive and make it more costly and you drive down risk versus reward, you see capital move elsewhere. And in the innovation economy, capital and actually labor.
I have a lot of questions. I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to cut you short.
Yeah.
But so correct to say that, or it is your testimony that this will drive investment out of the innovation sector.
Correct.
Okay. And what are the other barriers to investment? Red tape, the inability to procure, to access procurement contracts. What are some of the other barriers to investment and to opportunity in the innovation community?
Yeah, so definitely, the red tape and challenges on that issue. In terms of investment, though, Where we're seeing some more friction is really getting first customers, right? So you'll often struggle to have government actually purchase and buy domestic technology. They'll often fund them. They'll give them funding through different programs. And really, what our members are telling us is that they would much rather a purchase order rather than a grant or a subsidy, because they can take that and they can go to a bank and get funded and increase their ability to fund their operations. So for us, it's a shift in some of how these policies are structured, and through that you'll be able to help unlock capital that is very much needed.
Okay, fair to say though, if we are to, you rightly spoke of the declining per capita GDP that is we've experienced in Canada over the last 10 years, the worst performing economy projected, worst performing economy in the OECD. You also said you mentioned in your opening remarks, and maybe I'm going to get you to clarify the point that you made about the stagnant productivity since 2000. If you could clarify on that remark, but also, what are we going to need to do something about this? We need to incentivize innovators, and we're going to need taxing these innovators is not going to do it. Could you give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I sadly don't have a short answer here, so I'll try and be as succinct as possible. But in essence, what we have to realize is that the economy has shifted, where wealth and prosperity is no longer actually captured in labor. It's no longer captured in jobs. It's in those who actually own ideas, so own intellectual property and own data. And the value chain system has shifted. And so in order for us to be able to build wealth and prosperity, to reverse the stagnation, we have to build an innovation economy that can capture value chains. And so we actually have to shift many things at once. It's not just one tax policy that's going to unbind everything. So what we have to look at is, how do you build firms that are able to keep and retain intellectual property here? So when we're looking at how we fund things, are we generating IP? Are we retaining IP, and then are we commercializing it? And if you marshal government programs,
just quickly, then I don't have much time left. Is it fair to say then that there's an incredible deficit of investment between Canada and the United States? When you look at the cross-border investment between Canada and the United States, which for many, many years was positive in Canada's favor, Canadians are now investing their money in the United States. It's the gap is almost $500 billion. Is this failure or some of these failures that you've spoken of, they contribute to this deficit in investment in Canada?
Yeah, if you don't have a framework that actually captures wealth, it will leave and go elsewhere, right? Like, money is smart, it moves. I would also point out that 125,000 Canadians left Canada in 2023, a record number, and a lot of those were in the tech sector. So not only are we seeing capital flee and go south of the border, we're actually seeing a lot of our highly skilled workers as well.
So that's the legacy of 8 years, 9 years now. This is when the capital flight began.
Yeah, thank you, MP Kelly.
Okay.
That is the time.
We're out of time.
So now we're going to MP Sorbara, please.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of great discussion and thoughtful questions from all members on the committee today. It's great to have all the witnesses here, both virtual and in person. Thank you for availing yourselves, and thank you for your ideas and your testimony. Just to the Basic Income Canada Network, Sydney and Sheila, thank you and welcome here. I believe you're from Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, or yes. Winnipeg, both Etobicoke, I hear, and so I'll give a shout out to Etobicoke today, not Vaughan, something I usually don't do. When we think about our Canada social fabric and the social programs we have in place, I like to think about it. We have 4 groups of individuals or in Canadians in our country to take care of. We have our seniors, then we have disabled Canadians or Canadians with disabilities, then we have families with kids. And then we have just working Canadians who be at different stages of their lives, divorced, single, et cetera, no kids. And we have those 4. And when we look at our social programs in those 4 buckets, we're doing actually very, very well. If you think about seniors and the poverty rate and what we've done for seniors, since the late 1960s when we brought in CPP and the Health Care Act and so many great things and what we've done over the last 10 years as a government. Of course, I can rhyme off a number of measures, including reversing the old age security and GIS increase to 67 back to 65. That actually puts $20,000 in the pockets of seniors when they retire. that they would have lost, or increasing the GIS, or the expansion of the Canadian pension plan, which was done by the former finance minister in conjunction and collaboration with all the other provincial ministers. Great job. When I think of families and I think of the early learning national daycare plan we put in place, that may in fact be in jeopardy if the opposition party, because they want to get rid of it. It's clear on Instagram and other sources that they would like to get rid of it. And we think of the Canada Child Benefit that we put in place, which delivers about $30 billion a year to families. And about, I think it's $100 million in my riding and in Vaughan Murbridge and across the country. And then we think of working families, what we've done for the Canada Workers Benefit, to income tax cuts, raising the personal exemption amount to $15,000, cutting the middle income tax bracket. Again, real savings, about, I think it's like $15 billion in annual tax savings a year when you combine the two. So big measures. And I haven't even mentioned the Canadian Dental Care Plan, which literally I think we're almost 800,000 or above 750,000 Canadians have gone to the dentist because of this plan. We're covering a gap. Right? And we have more work to do. Pharmacare, we need a gap there that needs to be covered. So I think we're going the right way. And I just wanted to say that there because I understand your folks on basic income. I disagree with it. I think we put in place a social fabric that's great. So I wanted to speak to you like that. I'm not going to ask for a question because I got to shift gears in my limited time. And I do want to go to Benjamin over at the Council of Canadian Innovators, who I have a lot of respect for and have interacted with many of his members. Benjamin, I will be as frank as well. I'm not a doom and gloom person. I think Canada is the best country in the world. I think we are a G7 country. I think our fiscal framework speaks for itself. I think our innovators are the best in the world. Our investments, whether it's in AI or electric vehicles, whether it's in steel, aluminum, our agricultural sector, our wine industry, I can go on and on and on. I think this is Canada's decade. I've said it in the House. We have some work to do to make sure and solidify it's Canada's decade, but we're on the right track. One thing though, your recommendations, I've read through them. The SHRED program, it's over $100 billion of tax expenditures that the federal government does on an annual basis, if my calculation serves me well. But how important is reviewing the SHRED program, in your view, into unlocking even greater amounts of innovation for our economy?
Ben,
or Nick, or Benjamin, whichever one.
I'm happy to kick things off. I mean, let me just first say, Mr. Sorbauer, thank you for the question, and we agree this is definitely the greatest country in the world. I think, we all want those programs you listed. I think how we pay for them is maybe where we disagree. But to your question on SHRED, this is integral. As Benjamin said, this is the largest, this is the oldest, this is the most important innovation program we have in this country. It is nearly $4 billion every single year. And we are squandering a lot of that money, not only to foreign multinationals, but also to, the big four consultants, just to fill out the application. So it is in desperate need of reform, and we've participated in those consultations. I'll also note, though, that when we developed our policy brief, we did so in a thoughtful way to make it cost neutral. We know that, money is tight right now, so we wanted to be, thoughtful about that. That also requires that Canada implement a national innovation box or a patent box. So
actually,
also
Nick,
something we're happy to discuss.
I want to jump in there before I run out of time because I wanted to ask about the National Innovation Box bracket patent box regime and your recommendation too on your brief. Would it be wise to say shift resources from one program into that box? Because I for everything I've read, and I'm heavily read and so forth, and you have a lot of very thoughtful leaders within the council, is a National Innovation Box something where the gains, the first derivative change in gains that we would see on the innovation side and the productivity side, would that be a key driving force for us?
Yes. So the whole idea behind, our vision with an innovation box or a patent box, as you mentioned, is moving from inputs to outcomes. And so for those on the committee who, maybe not familiar, it's really an income-based incentive to encourage the commercialization of IP in Canada rather than direct R&D spending. More than a dozen European Union countries have implemented some form of patent box, along with China, Australia, and the United Kingdom. And one of the reasons for that is that these tend to be more effective for small, open economies like Canada's that rely on not only exports, but global value chains. And so we are really trying to rebalance SHRED with this patent box and say that, if you want the benefits in terms of, better tax treatment, you can have those. But you need to be commercializing that IP here in Canada and ensuring that the value of that and the wealth of that flows back to our economy and to Canadians themselves.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I think my time is up, if I'm not mistaken.
Barbara, and I'm just looking at the time, and we don't have time to get through a full third round. But what I'm going to do, as this committee is accustomed to, is we'll divide the time amongst all the parties. So we're looking at 5 minutes for each party or so to be able to ask questions for this final round. And we're starting with MP Bazan, and welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. My questions are going to be to the Council of Canadian Innovators, and you talked about how the government has been slow in adapting new technology. You talked about how Minister Champagne has started the blame game, blaming innovators. Do you feel like that things have been hostile towards innovation by this Liberal government?
So I think, you have to look at the record there specifically, right? So, I did bring up William Blake, execution as the chariot of genius. And I think there's been some attempts at trying to do some things, but the delivery in terms of how they've actually been executed missed the mark. And hostile, I would say maybe misunderstand or don't understand the complexities of an innovation economy. And the outcome of that is apparent, right? We've seen policies that haven't delivered. We haven't seen, the successes of job creation and wealth promotion from things like the superclusters. And so rather than relying and engaging with companies that are winners, that are out there actually selling, products globally, a lot of these policies are being ingested and created by folks who candidly don't understand how an innovation economy works. And so, part of our work is to come and to educate and to engage. And, we have definitely tried to do that with Minister Champagne and, his predecessor as well. But when you look at the frameworks of what's been actually achieved, I think that record is definitely a failure.
Okay, I appreciate that. Now, when you look at national defense and the innovation that needs to take place there and what you see happening in Ukraine, and Ukraine's been able to stay in the fight because of innovation using things like drones, electronic warfare, and cyber security to fend off attacks from the Russians. How can the innovation sector help Canada develop the type of defensive mechanisms that we need here, including cybersecurity? And you look at AUKUS in Pillar 2, which is all about quantum computing, AI, and cybersecurity, and Canada's not in the game. What can the innovators across this country do to help us from a national security and defense standpoint?
So on that front, I'll definitely kick it over to Nick in just a second, because I think he's very well versed on many of these pieces. But the thing about strategic procurement is that not only will it actually lead to economic opportunity and prosperity, but it's also part of national security. So to the point of your question around things like NATO, our inability to have the capacity to defend this country and to be able to work with our partners is critical. And look, if we're going to meet our NATO commitment, right, which is sort of that 2% piece, do it by actually buying domestic innovation and technology that can then be sold and go global. Right now I'm working with a firm in particular that the Ukrainians desperately want their technology, and it's a Canadian technology, but there's no ability for them to actually be able to procure it. And so when we think about these types of things, how are we, effectively using our expenditure on things like defense, not only to defend us, but create economic opportunity? Nick, I'll pass it to you if we still have time.
Mr. Bergen, can you just say what exactly that technology is that the Ukrainians need, and what's the impediments to getting it to them?
So given, the NDAs that we have signed with our member companies, I'm not going to, jump right into this right now in committee, but, I'd be happy to speak to you offline about this particular piece.
Okay, thank you. And if we can kick over on the AUKUS piece and NATO piece to your colleague.
Yeah, maybe just on the NATO piece, I'll say, look, we're trying to get to that 2% target. The only way we're going to be able to do that is through procuring domestic capabilities. We know that between 2018 and 2020, the cyber sector in Canada grew over 30% in terms of employment, R&D, and revenue, but only 8% of that came from Canadian government contracts. And to really put it in perspectives, Canada's Five Eyes partners buy 3 times as much Canadian cyber technology products and services than Ottawa itself. So other countries understand what we have. They are using it for their security apparatus. And for whatever reason, we failed to do so. I can't tell you how many times I have met with a new member, and they have told me that they do business with the American military, with the British military, but DND is nowhere to be found. So there's a lot of processes in there in order to, I think, hold our own in our military alliances.
We change the risk aversion, that culture of risk aversion that exists within DND at PSPC, and fix the procurement piece and make sure that Canada and Canadian Armed Forces in particular is an early adapter of our technology.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I think that is, definitely something that that we need to be working towards. And in our, 2 submissions, that really is sort of highlighted.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Bazan. And now to MP Thompson, please.
Thank you. Ms. Tessier, if I could start with you, please. I'm a fan of co-op housing, but and I have to have a shout out for the very strong supporters in my province of Newfoundland and Labrador who work so hard to really build capacity for co-op housing and also push against some of these stereotypes and barriers that as a province we faced in really promoting this as a real choice for so many people who need affordable and secure housing. I was really pleased in June for our government to invest $1.5 billion in co-op housing. So could you, in light of a very solid federal commitment to this sector, how is it that we can address some of the challenges that certainly I'm seeing around co-op housing as an important part of an overall housing strategy and the urgency to get these homes started?
Thank you for the question. And yes, you do point to a fact that sometimes there's misunderstanding or negative perception around co-op housing. Definitely, it's mixed solution. It's not social housing. I have worked as well in the nonprofit community housing, and so the co-op housing sector is very different. It is about empowerment. It does actually lead to skills development due to the model as well, which is another point that reinforces, the link between economic development and the cooperative housing model and its potential. The challenges I alluded to, one of ensuring that we have sufficient capacity. So having the resource groups, the technical expertise, and we are working quite quickly. And we say we are ready. We have been getting ready because we ourselves, prior to the announcement, the members set a vision to grow co-op housing. You will see in the pre-budget announcement as well that we are not near the average of the OECD in the number of nonprofit community housing, and in increasing that to be at par with other OECD countries will also contribute to our GDP. The main challenges is the funding to ensure affordability. Because that is primarily what our nonprofit co-op housing members with Sage of Canada provide. So can we build? I think you'll see that generally in all sectors, building right now housing is a challenge because no one can afford. So even buying. So the continued investment, it was noted before as well, when the program got axed, absolutely 100%, the development of co-op housing basically stalled. We've seen none. We were in the city of London not long ago. There has been no development of co-op housing there, in I think it was 22 years or something. And actually that was a surprise to some, right? They didn't realize. So absolutely the contribution, and it doesn't need to be a lot, as you see with the 1.5 million. It's 500 million in contribution. It just needs that leg up, and the benefit is long term. And through our co-op housing co-op difference research report shows that the housing also becomes more affordable over time. So it really is to act now, because this is a long-term solution that provides affordability, security of tenure, right? Having the house and not being fearful of being kicked out, being able to have a family because you're not going to be kicked out or rent evicted. So I think the challenges are more in the mindset shift of understanding cooperatives. That's a very big one, I think, and the continued funding and more funding. So we very much hope that this program will demonstrate the need. We have a long list. We know there's more need out there. So yes.
Thank you. And I certainly hope that this funding does provide that lift, and certainly that I'm able to see more co-op housing in my area. Very quick question, Mr. Giuseppe. You mentioned National Pharmacare and the importance of implementing this, and certainly we're moving forward with diabetes medication and prescriptive contraceptives. Could you comment on what this means for your members and moving forward, where you'd like to see this program go in terms of priorities?
Thank you very much for the question. Just to mention that, as I said, we welcome this initiative. Yes, we understand that it's limited to contraceptives and diabetes. But that being said, we would like it to be broadened because this is a very important social policy also for many other medications, because often we have very high bills for medication, and also or high bills for insurance, medical insurance, drug insurance. And so this is very important for our members, and I think we could improve the situation, but I think that it's currently a step in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Over to MP Samari, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, a question for ASIC. You talk about 1.25 million. It's something that has been in effect since 1997, I believe, which is the version. Yes, this exemption, temporary exemption, which was started in 1997, was supposed to be temporary, so it's become a subsidy for a radio that is paid entirely by rights holders. This is considered to be compensation for use of their works. So this was a payment for rights holders, artists, and workers for their work. So I understand that it's what is owed to your artists must be paid and must be continued to support our artists. And next question for Mr. Giuseppe. I would like to ask you with regarding to the importance of new housing and the importance of non-market housing. What do you mean by non-market? Non-market is because often the increase in housing costs means that there are repeated sales and a lot of speculation, and so we have housing that costs more or increases rents. But when we have cooperatives, cooperatives are there for the long term, and so there's no resale, and you just have to pay for the construction. But there's no speculation relating to this kind of housing. And I heard the other ones talked about the very mixed clients, and I believe that it's important that there be a good mix of clients for these non-market housing projects. And I would like to say that in Canada, over a number of years, we have more than 5% of housing that's non-market. In countries like France and the UK, it's 14.5%, not without referring to Sweden, which is about 40%. I think this is something that should be accessible to everyone, and I think with more effort we can do it. So affordable is not just enough. It's very important for it to be non-market. And one of your requests relates to funding for the assistance for workers and for the labor market. If my colleague Francois was here, Francois Bélanger, it would be similar. But in Quebec, the Labor Market Partners Association, which brings together the employers and employees, was asking that the program not be cut because this affects training programs for workers, and so that as we heard earlier, I think that we're not as productive as we would like to be, but I think this investment in our training and for our workers would be a contribution to productivity, and I think I don't think we should cut funds that are allocated where they're needed, and which is done in partnership with unions and employers in businesses. And I think this is an important step to ensure that Canada is well prepared for training, providing adequate training to workers. Thank you very much. I only have about 30 seconds. If the DISC wanted to have one quick last word, in fact, our requests this year do not have any effect on the public budget. There is nothing additional from the public medication fees for music producers would not cost any more, and it's a tremendous benefit for our members.
Davies, you'll be the final questioner of our excellent witnesses today before we conclude.
Thank you. Mr. Chevo, I think I agree with you, if I understand your testimony correctly, that Canada could be using and should be using our procurement policy to help better support the Canadian environment for businesses. I'm wondering then, would you agree that provisions in Canada's trade agreements that prohibit Canada from distinguishing between foreign bidders for procurement and Canadian domestic bidders, that those would be harmful then, such provisions?
I would. I think the risk aversion we see across procurement also applies to some of our trade agreements. So we stick to them to a T, which is, of course, important for our allies, but sometimes it comes at the cost of Canadian industry.
And I guess following that, it seems like the United States, they seem to be intermittently liberal in terms of trade policy, and then they get protectionist. And the latest iteration, I think, under the Biden administration, and I think even under the Trump administration, were very avowedly protectionist. Do you see that as sort of giving us a little bit of political room as a country to be a little bit more rugged, I guess, in terms of our using our procurement policies to help Canadian business people?
I do. I think a lot of what CCI preaches is not novel. It is what we're seeing in other advanced economies, including the United States. And I think regardless of who wins the White House, with USMCA, CUSMA up for renegotiation, Canada does need to be smart and aggressive about ensuring that domestic industries are well supported, looking at things like IP, digital rights. But, we see other countries with smart industrial policy, and what we are saying is that we should follow suit.
I'll just give one more question to you then. I'm thinking of other countries, sort of like the Scandinavian countries, that are considered to be, relatively high tax, high regulation jurisdictions, and they seem to be performing very, very well. They historically perform very well. Are there any lessons in your experience that we can learn from those Scandinavian countries and apply them here to help achieve the same kind of stellar results?
Sure. Benjamin, do you want to field that one?
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you look at the Nordic countries, right, with high productivity, higher taxes, really wonderful services that I think often, we reference, here in Canada, it really is how they're supporting their domestic innovation economy, right? So if you look at a country like Denmark, right, Nova is the company behind Ozempic, which, folks might be familiar with given its, popularity right now around the world. But Nova is really supported by the Danish government, right? So they marshal their education, they marshal research and development really in that space. And as an open, small economy, that's where they've really decided to be players. And Nova is such a large company in Denmark that they actually calculate it with and without the GDP of the company involved in it because it shifts the overall wealth and prosperity of the country so far. So as we march forward, looking at where there's opportunities for Canada to be winners in certain sectors, where we really marshal our forces on, capital, talent, customers, and freedom to operate, will really lead to, I think, some of the similar outcomes that we're seeing in other small open economies that are smart.
And I think that's a really good suggestion. I think one of you mentioned the need for a modern Canadian industrial strategy. And maybe industry is not even the right word anymore, but a smart strategy. Last word to Mr. Frankel and Ms. Reguer. I just want to give you my remaining time to tell us what you think we need to know about the minimum basic income.
I'm going to use this opportunity to respond to Mr. Sabera's non-question. We absolutely agree with him about all of the things he talked about that we've done right in Canada. For seniors, for families with children, those are unconditional programs. They work. They have a payoff in the economy. They have a payoff for people. It releases the capacity of people to do things. So we need to keep doing it because obviously we need to finish and deal with all of the unaffordability issues, the rise in poverty, the incredible insecurity people are feeling. We need to get on with it. So we agree with you, but it's not done yet.
Mr. Frankel, do you have anything to add?
I agree. We're doing well in most areas, but those Canadians living below the poverty line on provincial and territorial social assistance funded through the Canada Social Benefit would not agree. And the Canadian workers' benefit is tiny. It's good to have that program, but it's not doing nearly enough for Canadian workers who are working in the marginal lower echelons of the labor market. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Davies. And on behalf of the Finance Committee, we want to thank, as I said, our excellent, great witnesses here for their testimony and on our pre-budget consultations in advance of Budget 2025. We really appreciate all your remarks, and those have all been captured and will make up part of our report. So thank you very much. And members, I do need just a second of your time, minute of your time. So on Bill C-365, we just need as a decision point where bringing it to the House or looking for for some extension on that. And I do see MP P.S. Bendayan's hand up.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've discussed this very briefly in the past, and I would come back with a proposition and with regard to an open banking system in Canada, and we are committed to this framework and I think this is a subject that I'm very interested in, and I think it's a very important one. And since we're moving ahead with something, I think that this is important for the bloc and others. I would I suggest that we ask for a delay from the House, and perhaps we can have a meeting with witnesses to at least study this new law on a consumer open banking system.
Was your hand up, MP Samari? No, yes. So PS Bendayan is looking for the extension. Yeah, MP Chambers.
I mean, we wouldn't agree to the extension. I mean, I think what's happening here is the government waiting to get past the date when they will bring in their fall economic statement. So if Ms. Bendayan would like to produce a motion, we could consider it at next meeting, but we wouldn't be prepared to give consent for an extension at this point.
Members? No. Anybody else to speak to this? Okay, just 1 second. I'm just going to need to suspend for suspend. To a vote.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
On the extension. Yes.
So if there's a motion, unless I didn't hear something right, I didn't hear anyone say I would like to move the following motion, and I don't have anything in writing, and it's not translated, so I'm not sure
MP
exactly
Gray,
what you're voting on.
Thank you, MP Gray. What I asked the members is a decision point that we had to make. It was about reporting back to the House or looking for an extension. And that is what has been asked of the members, and now the members have an opportunity to be able to vote on that.
There's no motion on the floor to vote on.
The chair can't move a motion.
To PS Bendayan, was that what?
Ce que j'ai mis de l'avant, c'était une proposition. Je l'ai dit en français. Je pourrais le redire en anglais si vous voulez. Et
I'm not getting.
This participant's headset is not compliant. Interpretation will resume once the problem has been addressed.
Interpretation, please.
This participant's headset is non-compliant. Interpretation will resume once the problem has been addressed.
Non-compliant, so, yeah, it's not approved headset. Yeah, so we'll go to MP Davies, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what we're talking about here too. I know at our last committee business meeting, when we were setting out the business for the fall, we indicated that there was a private member's bill that had to be reported back to the House unless we sought an adjournment. I just want to clarify, is that what we're talking about here, that bill?
Yes, MP Davies, that is what we are discussing. We had discussed it in a previous meeting.
Right.
That is what we are discussing today. So we've come to that point where we need to make a decision, and either to the extension or reporting yes.
So because it has already been raised in committee business before, I don't think 48 hours notice is required. I think I'm happy to move a motion right now then that we seek an extension to consider that bill. I can't remember the number of the bill. I'm sorry, I'm in Vancouver, so I don't have my file in front of me.
C-365.
So I would move that we seek ask the House for an extension for C-365?
Yeah. 365, yes.
365, yeah. And is that, just from the clerk, is that 30 days, 30 sitting days, or what is the extension that we generally get?
Yes, it is 30 sitting days.
Okay.
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just speak briefly to my motion, if I might. It's been sitting there. It's reasonable. I haven't had a chance to actually really look at the bill. If we don't do anything, it'll be reported back unamended to the House. I don't think that's responsible, since none of us have had a chance to kind of look at the bill or even discuss it. I'm curious about my colleagues' views on the bill as well. I'm agnostic on it at this point. I haven't had a chance to take a position, but I think it's eminently reasonable that we take a little bit of time, which again, I think we sort of anticipated when we were discussing committee business just a few weeks ago. So I'll move that motion. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Davies. I do have a speaking order. So a motion has been moved for the extension on Bill C-365. I've got MP Samari, then MP Kelly, then MP Baker, then MP Chambers.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like unanimous consent to allow our witnesses to leave now that they are no longer required.
And we want to thank again our witnesses. And yes, you may exit. Thank you very much. We appreciate again your testimony coming before committee. Thank you.
Et ensuite, j'indiquerai.
And then I am in favor of having the committee study C365. I would not like it to go back to the House without it being amended or studied. I wonder if there should not be a 48-hour notice for this kind of a motion. So I'd like to have the clerk's opinion on that.
Sven for a second. Yes, it would need 48 hours if it was not on the business at hand, but it is the business at hand, so it does not require the 48 hours.
Point of order.
Point of order?
Point of order. It is not the business at hand. The business at hand was pre-budget consultation today. We were not meeting to discuss committee business. So it is not, it would require notice, it not being subject of today's meeting.
When I did open up discussion on C365, it became the committee business. Yes.
Do I have the floor then? Am I next?
You are next. If somebody's finished, yeah, you are next.
I move that we adjourn debate.
Okay. Clerk?
Mr. Baker?
No.
Ms. Zerwitz?
Negatory.
Mr. Sorbara?
No.
Ms. Thompson?
No.
Ms. Bandayan, please say up or down.
No.
Is no. Mr. Chambers? Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Bazan?
Yes.
Mr. Sainte-Marie? Mr. Davies?
No.
Yes pour 5-5, nays contre 6-6.
Okay, it's defeated.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
So on a point of order?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're past our time now, and I don't recall coming to an agreement that we would be past the time of this committee. So we're past the time. The committee was technically ending at 5:30, and we haven't had unanimous consent to continue on with this committee. I'm not sure if even there's committee resources to continue on with this conversation.
There are resources. We will continue. Yes. We are continuing.
The time is
with
up this
resources.
committee.
Yeah, we're continuing. And now we've got MP Kelly. Are you MP Kelly?
Well, yeah. Look, this we were thought that we were heading toward reporting this back. There was no plan during the time with which we spent on committee business to include this, and I'm disappointed that the parliamentary secretary in the last 15 seconds of this meeting before its expected adjournment chose to force through an extension to a bill that ought to be by now brought back to the House. Now, I wasn't on this committee during the previous time where this could have been studied, if it was a priority to study, and business and bills get priority typically over over business. So I don't know what happened before I was here, but this bill, it's time for it to go back to the House so that it can continue with the legislative process. I'm disappointed that this is how this has come about. And I guess we could just talk about this if that's what we're going to do now. But it's time for this bill to be reported back. I'm very disappointed with the tactic of springing this by way of a sloppily delivered motion in the final seconds of witness testimony on pre-budget consultation.
Okay, thank you, MP Kelly. I have MP Baker next, and then MP Chambers. You want on the list? Yep.
Well, I have been on this committee for a few years now, And this is the first time that I remember the Conservatives not wanting to study one of their own pieces of legislation. I think what we have is the members saying they'd like to study it and consider it before it goes back to the House. I think that's a very reasonable position. So that's all I have to say.
You, MP Baker. I've got MP Chambers, MP Gray, and then MP Davies.
Colleagues, we already agreed last meeting to what I think was a reasonable compromise amongst all competing interests, with the exception of Mr. Davies, who actually didn't, I don't think, got anything in the last negotiation that we had. And that was, I had thought, an opportunity to buy a little bit of peace for a bit. There's no reason we have to force a decision today. Why don't we just all take a break, reflect on it over the weekend, and come back on Tuesday with a proper motion? And maybe it's not 30 days, maybe it's 20, maybe it's a week. But I don't think we need to try to decide this today. And frankly, given the fact that we had a fairly good working relationship last meeting, I'm not really sure having people cancel flights on a Thursday night to sit here and do it, because that's what some of us are prepared to do here now, and I've just found out when the next flight is. So if we'd like to keep going around and around and around, we can continue to do that. We thought we had negotiated the next couple months out pretty well. It looks now like the government's trying to change the deal that we made last week. So I'll leave my remarks there in case that persuades anybody. You know, unless you want to start bringing in the bullpen, we're prepared to continue to talk about it. Let's just figure it out on Tuesday when we come back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. I've got then MP Gray, MP Davies, and MP Bazan.
Thank you very much, Chair. So my understanding is that we're debating here something today that was, literally dropped within the last minute of this committee sitting. I was packing up my purse and packing up my my bag. So this is a little irregular for this to be happening. I know that committees do committee business. I know that the different committees that I've sat on will have committee business and decide committee business. So it sounds like there's a desire to change that in a public forum like this, as opposed to when you're normally doing committee business. The ask, there really hasn't been a lot of explanation given to what the ask is, and quite often there will be, in other chairs that I've worked with, they'll sort of have their intention as to, we're going to do this, and then I'm going to put aside 5 minutes at the end because there's some committee business that we need to make a quick decision on, and that hasn't happened at this meeting. It sounds like it was. I'm not a normal member of this meeting, or of this committee rather, but it sounds like it was something that doesn't normally happen. So sounds like there's a lot of confusion here, and there needs to be some more discussion and some more thought. And so I'm a little bit unclear. I still haven't seen anything in writing. I'll just check my inbox here. I haven't seen a motion circulated in both official languages. So unless something has come through, I'll ask I'll look to my colleagues to see. The motion that was brought forth wasn't specific to the business of the committee. So therefore, there should be something that we should have in writing in both official languages, and that doesn't exist. And it sounds like it wasn't just a sort of friendly motion where it's a matter of, we're going to make this one smaller amendment. It sounds like it's something that needs a little bit more thought. So, Chair, I'm not sure if the mover of the motion has put that together and has that in writing being circulated? I don't know. I'll look to the clerk here to see if anything has been received and is being translated. Not that you're aware of. So the mover of the motion, I'm not sure if that's being circulated, but I would think that we should suspend this until we have the motion in writing in both official languages, because it's not on the business of the committee that we're dealing with right now. So, and it's not like it's just a three-word motion. It's more substantive than that. So I think it's normal protocol that we have motions that are out of the committee business to have that in writing.
Thank you, MP Gray. Just before I go to the next member, and I'll say that, what MP Davies' motion was to ask for the extension for 30 days. And I guess in the standing orders, MP Chambers, to your question, it has to be 30 days in the standing orders is what it says. So, and on that, and MP Gray is not a sitting member of this committee, either is MP Bazan. Just a little background, there has been significant discussion already around this. And we knew we were coming to a decision point that has to be made because of this going to be having to be reported back to the House. So just to give everybody a little background on that. So there has been discussion prior to this meeting. And a point of order, MP Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Could the clerk confirm whether it would be in the committee's ability to change the length of time from a 30-day extension to a 1-week extension? Are we not able to do whatever we like as the committee about giving an extension?
Suspend for a second. Just explain, please.
The extension of private members' business for the bills are specified in the standing orders. The committee cannot request something that goes beyond or differently than the standing orders. It's not within the committee's possibility to do that at all.
Okay, thank you, MP Chambers. So now I am going to MP Davies now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just a question before I want to continue with some remarks. My question is, through you, Mr. Chair, maybe to the clerk, what is the deadline that we have to make a decision as a committee on an extension before it's deemed reported back to the House?
Yeah, so thank you for that, MP Davies. It does have to be reported back to the House by next Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes. Yeah. And the challenge is, of course, we have PBCs, so we have witnesses already lined up for next week, et cetera.
So if I'm going to assume that all my colleagues around the table are proceeding on good faith, and we're not just going to be entering back into something that has been a problem historically with this committee that I've seen, which is delaying and filibustering and throwing up procedural roadblocks in order not to get to just regular business. But here's how this actually went down. First of all, committee business is always in order. It's always in order. And number two, you don't need a written motion to bring up something that's already been discussed. It's already part of the existing fabric of the business of the committee. You need 48 hours notice for a new motion that has not been brought to anybody's attention. Third, we discussed this issue and raised the issue of at our last committee business meeting that I appreciate, in fairness to Ms. Gray and Mr. Bazan, anybody else I can't see that wasn't there at, and Mr. Chair, you've pointed that out. So when we were discussing the fall schedule, we specifically mentioned that this bill was sitting on our docket and would be reported back to the House unamended unless we ask for an extension. And we put a pin in that, recognizing that we were going to have to come back to this. The next thing is, in terms of those that don't deal with it today, we either deal with it today or we deal with it on Tuesday. Both days are identical days. They are days where we're scheduled for pre-budget hearings today or on Tuesday. This is not a substantive issue. This is an issue whether we want to give ourselves an extra 30 days so that we can actually look at the bill. Now, I understand this is a conservative bill. If we don't do this, the bill will likely go back to the House and it could very well be defeated. If we don't have a chance to actually hear some evidence on it and consider the bill, I don't see how that does any service or assistance to the drafter of the bill, who I believe has worked hard to get it to this point. We all know that it's rare to get a PMB past second reading to committee. But that committee, that person deserves to have this committee take a look at the bill. And all we're asking for here is, can we give this committee a little bit more time in which to consider the bill? So there's nothing untoward. There's nothing procedurally incorrect. There's nothing by surprise. There's nothing substantive. This is frankly a garden variety housekeeping measure that we had identified would need to be taken care of. And frankly, Mr. Chair, I think it was wise and deft of you to leave it to the end of this meeting so that we got to hear from the witnesses. Nobody anticipated there would be any opposition to this. And so far, I haven't heard a substantive reason. Do any of my conservative colleagues, you don't want to consider the bill? You think it's better to have the bill reported back to the House with no examination by committee? Because that's what will happen. What is the advantage of waiting until Tuesday, where we have this exact conversation here today? Mr. Chambers is making veiled attempts to bring in the bullpen. What are they suggesting? A midnight filibuster over this profoundly insignificant issue of whether we grant ourselves a 30-day extension today or on Tuesday? Seriously? That's not serious. That's not serious parliamentary intentions, I don't think. So, I mean, let's go to a vote. If you don't want to give the 30-day extension, vote against the motion. If you do, we'll vote for it. We'll let the will of the committee prevail. But this is not an issue that we should be holding up. And my last point is, none of this bears in any way on the good faith that we all brought to bear last week or the week before that in coming to the fall schedule. We specifically identified this issue as one that could be dealt with. There's no subterfuge, there's no sneakiness, there's no resiling on any agreement, there's no backsliding. We're dealing with a piece of business we said we were going to deal with. And frankly, we at almost the last possible moment. So really, whether we do it today, whether we do it Tuesday, the committee members are going to have to make a decision. Do we want this bill to be reported back to the House without examination, or do we want to give ourselves a little bit of time so we can actually schedule a day or two to bring in the sponsor of the bill, who I think probably wants to come to the committee and have a chance to speak to the bill, and we have a chance to actually have a little bit of sober thought. My last point is this. If we have one duty as parliamentarians, it is to examine legislation that comes before us. And I think it's the height of irresponsibility to take a position that would see a bill that we want a chance to take a look at and hear a little bit of evidence on in the only part of the legislative process that actually allows for some evidence. For anybody here to say, no, we don't want that, let the bill go back without any of that scrutiny or examination or evidence or consideration, that to me is a dereliction of our duty as a parliamentarian. So this is much ado about nothing. And I think we should just get on with the vote. And I respect if people want to vote against it, but let's not hold up the committee business and all the important things we're going to do. My final point is this. Mr. Chambers is correct. I did not burden the process by demanding any particular issue of mine be put forward. I deferred so that the Conservatives got two of their priorities, got folded into the fall agenda. The pre-budget hearings, notionally, I guess it could be argued, are something of advantage to the government since it will be their budget. And my Bloc Québécois colleague also got something because we're folding in, his study as well. So nobody's trying to go backwards on anything, and there's no benefit to anybody by pushing this motion. It's just good committee management. So let's put the swords down. Let's all catch our planes tonight. those that need them. And let's just make a sound democratic decision on this and move forward.
Well, thank you, MP Davies. MP Davies is just correct in the sense that we did have a discussion on this, and we knew that the decision needed to be made. And we're coming up at the end of the time that we have to make that decision. Members, I do have MP Bizan, and then MP Zerowitz, Chambers, and then Kelly.
So I'll just say this as a longtime member on the Hill, a longtime person in chair positions on the Hill, over 8 years as a chair. These committees are created through the House of Commons. Our membership is approved by the House of Commons. And work that is referred to a committee by the House is supposed to take precedence over all other work. My understanding that in the 60 days that you've had this bill, there hasn't been a single meeting on this private member's bill, which I believe is not taking that reference from the House serious. The reason that extensions are provided by the House, again, it's the House that will provide the extension, and they have to agree to it, and it won't be agreed till next Wednesday. It's according to the rules. And if you want to go to page 1161 in the Rules and Procedure of Boss Gagnon, Chapter 21, and the only reason that they'll grant an extension if the committee couldn't complete its work within 60 days. The committee decided not to do the work in 60 days. And that to me is egregious in violation of the privilege of the member in the PMB, the sponsor of the bill. And so this bill should have been brought forward and considered in a justified time. If we couldn't do all the witnesses that were required, if it was an in-depth and technical bill, then that's why extensions are then granted. But to ask for an extension just because we didn't prioritize studying this bill, didn't call a single witness, didn't even allow the sponsor of the bill to appear before committee is egregious. And I would suggest that we let this bill, if it wasn't of interest to this committee up until this point in time, we'll report it back to the House or fail to miss the deadline where it will be deemed reported back to the House. But to request the extension of the House, who may not grant that extension because of the lack of seriousness shown by this committee in getting the work done in a timely manner, is a violation of parliamentary privilege.
Okay, thank you, MP Bazan. MP Zerowitz.
So first, Mr. Chair, I'm going to request that I never speak after Mr. Davies, just because he steals all my lines and it's becoming very, very annoying. So I want to just repeat everything that Mr. Davies has said. There's no fooling you guys. There's no, whoa, you waited till the very last second. It's because we want to honor our witnesses. You wait till the end. Just to let you know, I had our team member just look over the last 30 times we actually did extension requests. There were no issues, and it passed with unanimous consent on this committee. So we've had no issues. It's pretty typical. Mr. Bazan, with all due respect, you're not part of this committee. We've actually been studying all No, but you haven't been, I indicated. So we have actually been studying conservative motions. So all the studies that we've been doing has been based on conservative motions. That's okay. And conservatives haven't prioritized this particular PMB. So this is why what is typically done, we have asked for an extension. So I don't know why you guys are wasting time. There's times to filibuster. There's times to say, oh my gosh, this is awful. You guys are not organized. This is a very typical thing to do. We've been doing conservative studies. This has not been prioritized by the conservatives. So that's why we've been asking for an extension. It is your colleague who has put forward this PMB. And what we're trying to do is honor their work and actually be able to bring them here to be able to actually present so that we could actually ask some questions. I don't know why you guys would not want us to be doing this. There's no trickery here. We thought this would be a very easy thing because it is something we have been doing consistently. So nobody's fooling anybody. And for you guys to be wasting time on this, I think honestly should be an embarrassment.
Thank you, MP Zerowitz. I do have MP Chambers, then Kelly, then Gray, then Saint-Marie. Yeah.
I'll switch with Chambers if
No.
you like. No? Okay.
No. Okay, so we go to you now, Yeah, because I said MP Kelly right after, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. And you know, it's listening to lengthy interventions about the importance of not, you know, repeating or arguments or trying to get straight to a vote is interesting. But, you know, this is a bill about competitiveness in banking. We have in Canada a nice, cozy, inside club of 6 large banks with 95% of the business. And we are delaying with the help of the NDP. The NDP moved the motion to delay this bill in this place instead of sending it and reporting it back to the House of Commons, where we could quickly, in the last stages where we still have a chance in this Parliament before this government finally runs its course, to get this thing approved. I mean, look, I would just assume we went straight to a carbon tax election and we had no more business approved in this House. But if this Parliament is still going to continue to operate, getting this bill passed would actually be a positive step forward in helping Canadians save. It's believed by the mover and what we believe that this bill will do is save Canadians $400 a year. The lack of competition in financial services is a real affordability problem in this country, and we have a concrete measure that can be reported back to the House next week and take one step closer to becoming law. So I'm disappointed that the NDP seems so uninterested in expediting this bill that will actually do something about the power of the existing financial institutions and the lack of competition that they have there. And so I'm disappointed. I think that it's important that this bill get reported back. And, you know, I guess to those that have said, well, this is why are we making a big deal about something that was just happened to be moved in the last dying seconds of this meeting, and that there was nothing, this wasn't done with malice or anything like that. I mean, we have the ability to communicate with each other. If the Liberals had a concern about this bill and were keen to ensure that it be studied at committee, given the discussion that we had about the business of this committee, and if there was consensus on a work plan, which it certainly seemed that there was, the parliamentary secretary could have picked up the phone and talked to the Conservative vice chair and shadow minister for finance, raised the concern, discussed a work plan, and achieved consensus. But that didn't happen. We had the surprise, the ambush in the final seconds of this committee, wherein the parliamentary secretary, not even well enough prepared for this meeting to come with a proper headset, springs a delay that had not been discussed. So I am disappointed, and I'm not prepared to go without these points being made, and without argument in favor of this bill as well. This is a good bill. This is a bill that should be reported back to the House and given its best chance to expeditiously pass this Parliament.
Thank you, MP Kelly. I've got MP Gray, then Saint-Marie, then Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I mean, just so that what we're clear here is that the Liberals and the NDP, I mean, obviously the coalition is really strong. It continues on. They're trying to delay this Conservative private members bill, which was agreed to move forward. And why do they want this bill to be delayed? I mean, it's really interesting because we know that the Liberals and their NDP partners are big fans of big business, and you know what will this bill do? we know that this conservative private members bill will address a lot of the banking challenges in Canada due to a lack of competition. Competition is a major issue, and the banking sector in Canada is like an oligopoly. There's very little competition, and we've seen this even with recent mergers. We know that the contents of this private members bill, of this conservative private members bill, was promised by the government years ago. Probably up to 7 years ago, and then now they're wanting to delay this conservative private members legislation. This is at a time right now as well where unemployment continues to rise in Canada. We know that we just heard earlier testimony today, which is working on the study that is happening at this committee right now is pre-budget consultations, and we just had damning testimony on the competition and how the tech sector is being crushed by the policies of this current Liberal government, how GDP per capita is down in Canada, how productivity is down, how investment is leaving Canada. We just heard that just moments ago. And so here we have this private members bill, a conservative private members bill that has an opportunity to address, issues in one particular industry, and the Liberals and the NDP are wanting to delay it. I mean, it's actually quite unbelievable. This private members bill should have been fast-tracked, if anything, because it would save the average Canadian $400 or average family $400, like it has happened in the United Kingdom. And so right now we've got this strong continued coalition between the NDP and the Liberals. And they're teaming up. It's like they're wanting to support the big banks, and they're wanting to support a lack of competition. We know that they've already supported mergers, in this country that have left less choice for Canadians and have increased. We've already seen cost increases for Canadians. So a lack of competition is a huge issue. And the private members bill that we're discussing here, that the Liberals and the NDP want to delay, is in an industry where there is a lot of a real lack of competition. We have it in the aerospace sector, the banking sector, and this government, supported by the NDP, continue to create policies that are not helpful. Productivity is down in this country. We know that people's paychecks aren't going as far, and we have some of the most expensive services in Canada, including in the banking sector. And so, to want to delay this piece of legislation, you have to wonder why. Why would the Liberals and the NDP want to delay this conservative private members bill that would address some of the issues, at least open up the opportunities in the financial services sector and in the banking sector? So it's really odd. I mean, considering that this has been that there are timelines that Parliament sets out, that it hasn't been dealt with. The government hasn't dealt with this, and now they're wanting to delay this private members bill. It just doesn't seem to make any sense. Wanting for the biggest companies that are, that have very little competition, it just doesn't make sense. Why would they want to withhold this conservative private members bill from moving forward? That's a question that Canadians should be asking. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Gray. I do have MP Sainte-Marie on next.
Oui,
Somebody,
merci,
the floor is
Monsieur
yours.
le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would suggest that the debate be adjourned. I propose adjournment of the debate.
Mr. Baker.
Take the vote.
In favor.
In favor, Mr. Baker? Ms. Zarowitz.
In favor.
Mr. Sorbara.
In favor, Monsieur le Président.
Ms. Thompson.
In favor.
Ms. Bandian. Ms. Bandian says yes. Ms. Goodridge.
In favor?
Ms. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
En faveur.
Mr. Bazan. Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Oui.
Mr. Davies.
Opposed.
Yeas pour 10, 10, nays contre 11, 11.
Okay, the debate is adjourned. So now, members, shall we adjourn the meeting? Okay, we're adjourned.